One of the phrases that or sentences you just uttered that stuck out at me most was that the moralities we inherit admit of natural explanations, as opposed, of course, to supernatural explanations. And you just hinted at this a couple of minutes ago, but is that the chief implication of the famous phrase that you also just said a few minutes ago, that God is dead, namely that morality does not come from God, or is there a whole family of meanings behind that?
Yeah, I'm not sure that I would say that's the primary meaning. Now, Nietzsche does think that belief in Christian morality has been propped up by belief in God. And Nietzsche is hopeful, because he is opposed to Christian morality. He is hopeful that as belief in God becomes more and more incredible, that this will ultimately undermine Christian morality. So Nietzsche views the death of God, as it were, as good news, or as he likes to say with a little, irony, Christian irony, he says, glad tidings. The death of God is glad tidings because it might ultimately undermine the dominance of Christian morality. When Nietzsche first introduces the idea, or most famously introduces it in a passage from the 1882 book called The Gay Science, which is written the year before Zarathustra, the context is someone he calls the madman. It goes into the town square and announces God is dead and we have killed him. All right. But the important thing to notice is that the people around him in the town square are already atheists. Right. They don't believe in God. And this is the important thing for Nietzsche, is that by the middle of the 19th century, there are all kinds of reasons people are giving up belief in God. Right. There's Darwin. There's naturalistic explanations of the evolution of the earth. There's Kant's famous attack on natural teleology. I mean, there's all kinds of things coalescing to explain why people would believe in God, right? And that eliminate the traditional need for God as an explanatory posit, right? So Nietzsche just takes that for granted. So he doesn't argue for his atheism. We're the baseline. And it's the baseline when the madman announces the death of God, right? But the madman says, we don't really realize how serious a crisis this is. We don't realize the implications of it. Right? And this is why the crowd thinks he's a madman, not because he denies the existence of God. They're all atheists, but they're all sort of like, you can think they're like the Richard Dawkins of the day. They're free-thinking atheists. Of course, we know this God stuff is nonsense and superstition, but it doesn't change anything about our view of morality or value or anything. We're all still good Judeo-Christian moralists, right? And what Nietzsche thinks is that these complacent atheists who think, oh, you can give up the belief in God and still take morality seriously, he thinks they don't even realize the actual import of the belief that they've given up. They haven't seen yet, right, what the consequences of that belief are going to be. Now, I'll just say as an aside, I think Nietzsche was wrong about this, and he was wrong by his own lights. Let me explain what I mean by that. Nietzsche is what we call in the philosophical traditions a sort of moral sentimentalist. He thinks moral judgments are essentially emotional responses, right? You feel sadness, you feel happiness in response to different kinds of states of affairs or actions or something, right? You see someone suffering and you empathize with them and you feel this is bad, they're suffering, right? So he's a moral sentimentalist, right? And the thing is, if you train people to have certain kinds of moral sentiments, which Nietzsche elsewhere in his writing recognizes, right? This is what upbringing is, right? As he says, children are, like born imitators. They're like apes. They imitate the moral responses and sentiments of their parents, of their community, and so on. So that if at the foundation of our moral judgments are just these emotional responses that we've gotten into the habit of having, then it doesn't matter if the belief in God becomes incredible, because it's not actually the rational foundation for belief in morality doesn't matter on the sentimentalist view. It's just a matter of sentiments. Right? So there's a slight irony in this. I mean, Nietzsche's picking up on the idea, as he often says, that the Christian God is a particularly egalitarian God. That is, everyone is equal before God. Everyone is equal because they have a little bit of the divine in them, right? The human soul created by God, or the, kind of mirrors God, right? So there's this very strong egalitarian streak in Christianity, and in Christian morality. And just to be clear, there can be an egalitarian streak in Christian morality and lots of Christian hypocrisy too. Okay, but there's no doubt the egalitarian streak is there. Everyone is equal in the eyes of God. Everyone's familiar with that kind of way of thinking in the Christian tradition. And, so Nietzsche thinks, well, if there is no God, then why think people are equal, right? But, that seems like a fair point. But if you're a moral sentimentalist, then you recognize you can breed into people, sentiments in favor of egalitarianism and against inequality. And it doesn't matter if they have no rational foundation. But that's roughly what I take Nietzsche to mean by God is dead. It is certainly true that if you realize there is no God, then you can't explain, Judeo-Christian morality by saying, well, God wrote it down on a tablet and gave it to Moses, right? That's just make-believe, right? But as I say, Nietzsche takes for granted those explanations are no longer credible in the 19th century, and they're no more credible today than they were in the mid-19th century.
Just as an aside, so you mentioned the etymology of moral terms, and there is an etymology that I'm curious about. So gay has had a number of meanings. I know it means homosexual men. I know it has meant happiness, but I cannot think of any meaning that I know of gay that substantiates the title, The Gay Science, of that book that came out before Zarathustra.
Yeah, well, so it's the German Fröhlich. And it could be cheerful, it could be gay, but there's no question at the time gay doesn't have any connotation related to sexual orientation, right? And maybe, to the modern English ear, cheerful is better in that regard as the translation, right? Let me just say, it would take us too far afield for me to try to explain why he calls the book The Cheerful Science. But Nietzsche does think of himself as a kind of cheerful person, cheerful message, right? I mean, this may seem ironic, but as I said, he thinks the news that God is dead is actually a bit of glad tidings, because it raises the prospect of a world that is free of the dominance of Christian morality, which he thinks is going to be a wonderful thing. And we can talk more about why he hates Christian morality so much.